All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us here today. My name is Shayla Favor, and I serve as the Chair of City Council's Housing Committee, and I'd like to officially call this hearing to order. 2 weeks ago, we held a public hearing to provide updates on the remaining policies outlined in Council's 2023 Housing Initiative Package, as well as the Department of Development's Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Policy Proposal. If you missed that, you can find it on the city's YouTube page. This afternoon, I am co-hosting this hearing with Council President Harden to go deeper into two policies: wholesaler regulation, which is being led by Council President's office, as well as the administration's proposal on the Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Policy legislation. Again, as always, I think it's important for me to say that these policies alone will not fix the housing crisis, and they alone are not intended to. But they are tools that we have that provide tangible solutions to further protect tenants, build pathways to home ownership, and increase the housing stock in our city. This will be led as almost two mini hearings. First, we will hear from Council President on the wholesaler regulation and go into public speakers for this policy. Then we will hear from Aaron Prosser, the Assistant Director of Housing Strategies with the Department of Development, who will present on the Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Policy legislation. And then we will hear from public speakers who have signed up to share feedback on this policy. We have a lot of speakers lined up, so I do ask for your patience as we navigate this hearing this afternoon. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Council President Harden to share on the wholesaler regulation policy.
Thank you, Chair Favor, and again, because of the engagement today from the community, we want to be brief, but also because today's hearing is about listening. Council wants to make sure that as we discuss these important legislative policies that and as we work with our partners, that we are doing our job to hear from the residents and those impacted by these policies. So as Councilmember said, 2 weeks ago we held a hearing to announce that our offices were beginning to investigate the practice of wholesaling. We are trying to understand the growing share of our properties in our community that are purchased not by working families and first-time home buyers, but by institutional investors like bulk buyers and high-volume landlords. Those are folks who own at least 500 homes already. 500 homes already. We're trying to understand who these folks are and what impact this is having in our neighborhoods. Certainly a lot of institutional investing is perfectly legitimate. What concerns us most is where predatory wholesalers go into distressed neighborhoods, maybe those who are struggling to pay their taxes or pay bills, misrepresent themselves as realtors or brokers, prey on communities, specifically communities of color and seniors, send those harassing "can I buy your home" text messages and flyers, and make a lowball cash offer. We are also concerned because we know wholesaling is a critical link in the chain that delivers properties into the hands of these bulk buyers, sometimes out of state. And they take advantage of loopholes in laws and use a range of LLCs to obscure and hide their tracks. These often become the properties that deteriorate neighborhoods and become hotbeds of code enforcement. So we are here today to listen and to learn. We have some initial policy ideas about what we might want to do, but we want to hear from the industry professionals, from neighborhood leaders, and from community leaders about how this is playing out in the community and what the city needs to do about it. Before we go to public testimony, is it okay, Chair, if I turn it over to? I'm going to ask a member of our team, Nia Walters, from our Legislative Research Office, to share some of the data we've collected in partnership with the Franklin County Auditor's Office, Mike Cinziano, about how this is playing out in the community. Ms. Walters.
Thank you, Council President and Chair Faber. My name is Nia Walters. I serve as a legal analyst within Council's Legislative Research Office, and I staff the Housing Committee. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Franklin County Auditor's Office, thank you, for their technical assistance and partnership. The data they have provided has been essential to understanding how wholesaling occurs right here in Columbus. When a wholesale buyer secures and then assigns a contract, it does not get captured by the transfer and conveyance process that records every aspect of a traditional real property sale. These buyers would not show up on a conveyance and would not be in any information reported by a licensed real estate professional. For this reason, it is difficult to track wholesalers. Often they operate behind a web of confusing LLCs, making it challenging to identify them. What we can track is actual sales between the prior owner and a business entity. Occasionally, you might get a transfer from the owner-occupiers to an LLC, which would look different and can mask the entity ultimately in control. Once a property is owned by an LLC, it can change hands many times without public reporting, depending on financing. If mortgages are involved, they are recorded and can signal a change. Similarly, if an LLC changes hands, a change in the statutory agent should be filed, but these changes can also be hard to track. That said, we do know the outcome of this kind of work, which shows up traditionally in owner-occupied properties moving towards being investor or corporate-owned and rented, flipped, or kept vacant. A national report by Redfin in 2022 found that in Columbus metropolitan area, which includes Delaware, Fairfield, Franklin, Hocking, Licking, Madison, Morrow, Perry, Pickaway, and Union counties, investor corporate involvement in transfers of property was up 14% from 6% in 2015. The type of owner of a property matters. A detailed study of this issue in the Cuyahoga County by their local Vacant and Abandoned Property Action Council showed that percentage of homes outside companies bought in the county grew from 7.1% to 21.1% in 2020. So that's a total of 300%. The Franklin County Auditor has found that this is happening in an increasing number of properties here in Columbus, specifically parcels with single-family homes. There are currently 17 entities in Columbus that own over 100 parcels of residential property, up from only 11 in April of last year. The county believes some of these entities are even linked, and organizations with 400 or 500 parcels are being controlled by one main institutional investor. There are 11 entities that own over 100 properties. Added up, these 11 entities control thousands of parcels in our city. One way investors can get these properties so quickly in such high numbers is through bulk buying. In 2023, 18 conveyances included at least 10 parcels, the most for one sale coming in at 64 properties. In light of 2024's property tax appraisal, we are expecting an increase in residents who struggle to pay their tax bill. This increase will likely lead to those residents being pressured by wholesalers to make a rush decision to sell without understanding possible lost equity or having a firm plan of where to go. Thank you for your time, and thank you again to the Franklin County Auditor's team for this information and data.
Thank you, Ms. Walters, for that information. Again, thank you to the city, our county auditor's office for the partnership in this work. And with that, I'm going to turn back over to Chair, I think, as we start public testimony. Sorry.
Thank you, Council President Harden, and thank you, Naya, for that presentation this afternoon. We will move right into our speakers. We have 15 speakers that are signed up to speak for this portion of this afternoon's hearing. When you please state your name. You will have 3 minutes. If you have with any organization, please state that one as well. There will be a polite ding that we will hold you to because there are 15 of y'all.
Madam Chair, I was about to say,
Yes.
just so Madam Chair doesn't have to be the mean one. We do have a council meeting tonight,
Yes.
so we will be really strict with the 3 minutes because we also have CRA speakers as well.
Yes.
Sorry.
And to that point, Council President, I did receive an email from a constituent that had expressed concern about these past 2 hearings being held on a Monday in the afternoon. Council President and I are working with multiple schedules here, and so we do appreciate your patience. During the last few weeks before we go on break, it's a really busy time, and so that's why we had to host these hearings back on a Monday, but we will go back to our regular schedule, hearing schedule, when we return from winter break. With that being said, our first speaker is Carly Booz, which will be followed by Vincent Coleman. And welcome back to council.
Good evening, council members. Chair Favor, thank you for the time. I'm going to keep my remarks incredibly brief because I will be speaking later regarding the CRA policy as well. My name is Carly. I'm with the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. We have continued to hear from our members and from individuals from the public about certain abuses, manipulative practices, extractive practices of institutional actors, bulk buyers, warehousers, and wholesalers, and we are appreciative of this body for taking action to investigate and identify solutions. What the Alliance has challenges with isn't the status or the name of these individuals, it's the tactics that they deploy. We are hearing stories of misrepresentation of sellers' rights, misrepresentation of the property's value and how much a seller can achieve by going through a transaction. We are hearing of coercive or deceptive practices in the transaction, including exploiting individuals who are financially vulnerable, who may have capacity issues, who may not be able to serve in their own best interest and lack a reliable party to lean on. And we are hearing of tactics to evade the property conveyance fee, which we know goes to support additional affordable housing in our community. We believe that promoting transparency and accountability during this process is appropriate, and we, like you, are interested in hearing additional testimony and experiences of the community and helping to identify solutions that are appropriate to curb these practices. So I just want to say thank you again for the time and for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly, for your continued advocacy. Next speaker is Vincent Coleman, which will be followed by Radhika Moore.
Good afternoon, Council President Hardin, Chair Favor, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Columbus Realtors as this committee reviews the wholesaling regulations and accountability. My name is Vincent Coleman. I'm the Government Affairs Director with Columbus Realtors, which is the state's largest local professional trade organization comprised of over 9,400 real estate professionals engaged in residential sales and leasing, commercial sales and leasing, land syndication, real estate syndication, land development throughout the Central Ohio region. Columbus Realtors Multi-Listing Service, or MLS, also serves all of or part of the 13 counties here in Central Ohio. Real estate professionals pride themselves on being ethical industry experts, especially when leading clients through one of the most expensive and complex transactions that they will ever make, the purchase or sale of a home. And so thanks again for the opportunity to bring some insight and perspective to the concept commonly referred to as wholesaling real estate. You may have been or may know of someone who's been contacted by one of these agents offering to buy their homes, and in reality, they don't know who's behind the phone or behind the door. A legitimate buyer, a realtor, a scam artist, and far too often this practice preys on our aging population, our disadvantaged populations, and those in low to moderate income populations. Wholesalers typically do not disclose fair market value and do not hold the fiduciary duty to their client, but rather to themselves. Excuse me. And so we owe it to the citizens and residents of Columbus to help with some understanding and education when dealing with these callers or solicitors. Wholesaling, when done legally and appropriately, can benefit a consumer. And so we appreciate council taking the step in a positive direction, and we encourage this body to create some sort of licensing around this activity and to rein in some of the bad actors. And this is a step to not only help educate, but to avoid some pitfalls currently adversely impacting many of our residents. And so in closing, we're faced with the unique opportunity to create legitimacy and guardrails to the practice for the benefit of Columbus. There is a precedent for cities taking these major steps in protecting consumers. And so we encourage and support council taking this timely and necessary step. Again, thank you for the time, and go Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman, and we thank you for your advocacy on behalf of the Columbus Realtors. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say, again, when we think about stakeholders, the Realtors were the one who pointed us to legislation in Philadelphia, which we are taking very seriously as at least a guide to help us ask questions about what we can do. So we appreciate that type of feedback as we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Radhika Moore, followed by Janine Parnham. Apologies for mispronouncing. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. I am very honored to be here today to advocate. As a realtor, I am brokered through Red One Realty. Being out in the community, I see a lot of people who have been victimized by predatory wholesalers, predatory purchase. One of the things that dearly is very close to my heart is when people contact me and they say they've been contacted by one of these wholesalers and they say, I just don't know what to do. One thing that I'm very passionate about is making realtors, a lot of these people, you see commercials and different things and they say you don't need a realtor. They speak a lot about, you can get this done and you don't have to pay a real estate fee. So that's very dear to me that they are actually slandering realtors. We want to have our name known in the community as trusted professionals. And I've seen a lot of this go on in the community, so I'm glad that we're here advocating today to bring change to this. It helps protect some generational wealth for our community, and is very much so needed. I have a lot of stories, too many to share today, of different examples, but I'm glad to be here today to advocate for this change. It's definitely needed in our communities. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Moore, for your advocacy this afternoon. Next, we have Janine Parnham, followed by Danielle Jackson.
Hi, I'm Janine Parham. Glad to be here, Councilman Harden, for favors. I have been in real estate for over 20 years now, and as I go on and see the different changes in the real estate market, wholesaling has been the #1 change that has affected the city of Columbus. I have been contacted by lawyers, especially from legal aid, where they have sellers calling them asking, hey, Janine, they need help. I will give an example, where I went to one lady's house and she said the wholesaler offered her $20,000 for her home. This was her house that she grew up in, raised her kids, and now is getting offered $20,000 to move somewhere where she probably won't be able to afford. By the time I did speak with her, we put the house on the market. We've had over 30 offers where she got triple the amount. She was able to pay off the mortgage balance that she had and continue on to take that money to move into a better situation.
That would be great.
What I see right now is the targeting of, I have no problem, I like this, do say I have no problem with people gaining wealth with investments and trying to do the right thing. As licensed realtors, we are held to, like they said, a fiduciary duty, which means obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and we also have to have reasonable care. So as a realtor, to see what the wholesalers are doing in the neighborhoods and to the community is after going after the people who are elderly, like he said, elderly, or have a simple gutter that's hanging, where they're calling code enforcement. They're forcing them, they're scaring them, letting them know that, hey, the city's gonna take your house if you don't turn it over to me. So this has been a big problem in the city of Columbus right now, where I think that we do have to address this situation. In other states, such as Illinois, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, you have to be licensed realtor to be a wholesaler. You have to honor the code of what you're doing, loyalty, fiduciary duties to the constituents of your people that you're working with. So I hope, and I thank you for addressing this situation, and I hope further along, if anybody out there has any issues with, even with code enforcements, there are other resources that we can help you get your house fixed up. There's resources out here where you can get your gutters fixed, get the plumbing fixed, where they're not going to harass you, get your grass cut. So thank you very much for bringing this to our awareness and letting us speak.
I have a question.
Yes.
Madam, one sec. I just
Ma'am.
wanted to ask you, as a lifelong resident of Columbus, it seems like this has gotten worse over the last period. How long has this been going on? When did you see this become a real issue for our residents?
So I'm going to say really after we had the 2008, 2007 crash, back when we started picking back up in the South Side, near the Children's Hospital area in 2010 through to 16, that's when we started getting a lot of investors coming in, taking them, flipping the houses, not really completely fixing them up and selling them. So it's been going on a while, but probably the last, I'm going to say 5 years, where we're having multiple offers, where they're coming in with cash, all these LLCs, and we're not able to sell homes to the residents, first-time home buyers, because they're taking cash and you can't compete. So it's become a problem in that situation. Even if I work with an investor, I do like if they take the property, fix it up, I want them to sell it to a first-time home buyer. So that is my goal when I work with anybody as far as investment. But I believe that it's just absolutely right now, it's just getting out of control. Because now even for us to look at a buyer, I just had a buyer where we had to go through a wholesaler because they wanted to purchase a lot. We did have legal look at the terms and the conditions of the wholesaling contract, but that was the only way for them to purchase the property.
Wow.
Was
Thank you.
going through the wholesaler.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful. Next, we have Danielle Jackson, will be followed by Stephen Torsel. Welcome to council.
Thanks for having me. My name is Danielle Jackson. I'm a realtor in Columbus, Ohio with eXp Realty, and I also represent the Columbus Realtors Association. I'm going to echo the sentiments from my colleagues who spoke before me and discuss how wholesaling impacts first-time home buyers specifically. So as my colleague before me stated, that it is very difficult for first-time home buyers to compete with wholesalers or cash investors acting under an LLC. I'm going to attest to working with many first-time home buyers when we are looking for a property for them to purchase in their price range. That is usually the price range in which wholesalers usually target due to the price being affordable. So for first-time home buyers, they are coming in with down payment assistance many times using the FHA home loan or conventional or VA, et cetera. And when there are multiple offer situations, the home seller and the listing agent are reviewing multiple offers. Sometimes they will consider cash buyers before they consider those with other contingencies. So last year specifically, there were many of my clients who were unable to win these offers. I would consider it bid. I hate that it has become to that, but I would consider that to be like them bidding against wholesalers. And we were having to compete on a level which is really not productive for a first-time home buyer. For example, cash wholesalers are waiving many of the contingencies that are very necessary for first-time home buyers. First-time home buyers, we really, as professional realtors, encourage them to get inspections and to keep those contingencies, appraisal contingencies, to ensure that they are investing properly. This is their home where they will reside. For many of these cash investors, they don't have to consider these contingencies, and they don't. They will waive inspections, they will waive appraisals, et cetera, which makes it very difficult for first-time home buyers to compete. In addition to that, I want to attest to the targeting of many of the lower income areas, and it's actually leading to much gentrification. What the wholesalers are doing, they're targeting areas where many of the people are their property is distressed or older or unable to afford the repairs that are needed to keep their home in great shape. Many of them are very worried to call a realtor. So these wholesalers, as my colleague stated earlier, are discouraging them from calling a realtor. We are professionals who are held to a standard, which we provide great comps, we provide great values of their home, and the wholesalers are not held to that same standard. They offer these people money to basically relieve them of their situation, and it's usually not market value. I think my time is up. Thank you.
Ma'am, I actually have a question for you.
Yes.
What would be your advice to someone if they believe that to find out if they are dealing with a wholesaler or not? Are there some red flags that can be easily identified?
There are, if they are a professional realtor or a licensed real estate agent, they would be able to look online and see if that person is registered as a licensed professional who is held to real estate standards. If they are a wholesaler, many times they won't disclose what company they're with, et cetera. So I would say for people who are being targeted to ask what company they represent, and also if they are a licensed professional and what standards they are being held to, professional standards they're being held to.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Stephen Torsel, will be followed by Paul Bryson. Welcome to council.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Torcell. Easy to make the mistake. Councilmember Favor, Council President Hardin. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm the Executive Director of Homes on the Hill Community Development Corporation, and I think our perspective on this issue is fairly unique. First, as a developer, we compete with other people who are either purchasing properties or building properties. Second, as a housing counseling agency, we see folks coming in with all of the related issues that the housing crisis has brought forward. I think it's interesting to note as you talk about LLCs. What I do as a matter of practice each week, I get the Daily Reporter, which lists transactions. And our main zip codes, the 23, 28, and 04 zip codes, typically have 30 to 40% activity from LLCs. Now, I can't tell you the extent of what that might be. Some of it is obviously being sold to people, perhaps as homeownership or investments, but the fact that there's that much activity in a particular neighborhood is of concern, especially if it's not documented and regulated. So I applaud you for your efforts continually, frankly, to help us with this type of situation in our neighborhood, because as many of the speakers have said before, the impact of this is very broad. First of all, it does limit the ability of people to purchase homes for themselves. I think we all know about cash buyers and the impact that that has. And other folks have referenced the history of the housing crisis from 2008 when prices crashed to the opportunity investors took following that to purchase property and move forward. So in some ways, we're still dealing with that in a very unique way with the appreciation that we see in the neighborhood. But anything you can do to help people have a better opportunity, first of all, to purchase property for themselves, or secondly, to have better recourse to their landlords and tenants would certainly be appreciated. Thank you again. If you have any questions, be glad to answer.
Thank you for your testimony this
You're welcome.
afternoon.
Sure.
Assistant Director Aaron Prosser, that I know that we don't have you on to the second portion of today's afternoon hearing schedule, but Mr. Torcell's testimony did have me think about what we have been calling naturally occurring affordable housing in our community, and how wholesaling is having a negative impact on that. Would you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Just quickly to reiterate, as we have that continued housing scarcity and those partners are continually more interested in our community, it does price out not only those buyers, but then escalates those prices in those communities, pricing out a lot of our families that are ready for home ownership, that are maybe ready to change into a different house. All those opportunities get stilted when those actors are in the community. And I think as we continue to have that housing scarcity, we'll continue to see those folks interested in our community.
Thank you for that. And next we have Mr. Paul Bryson, followed by Joshua Hively.
Good afternoon. President Hardin, Chair Favor, thank you for having me here today. My name is Paul Bryson. I'm a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society of Columbus. I focus on community economic development work, small business, and nonprofits. And I want to start by thanking you for taking up this issue. For the 5 years I've been at Legal Aid, so far in my career, part of my time has been devoted to how we address this predatory buying issue. I started hearing stories about it immediately, just like the ones that everyone here is sharing, and finding that there was very little that the law let us do already. So I wanted to share some of the proven strategies that do work. First, as a few people have mentioned, it's just like in the wild. Predators attack the vulnerable. So bolstering assistance for critical repairs and mortgage shortfalls creates resilience against these vulnerabilities. And in this time of year, when we've all gotten notices of increasing property tax bills, real estate tax assistance is critical. As you likely already know, County Auditor Stinziano's office is making a plea to all the municipalities in the county to establish a fund for tax assistance. In my experience, that's a need that has often gone unmet, even without the unprecedented growth in sale values we see today, and would be a chief way to reduce the vulnerability that gives these predators an in. Second, as you've already mentioned, the Philadelphia ordinance, which creates a do not solicit registry. It requires licensing of wholesalers. It requires buyers to give a homeowner bill of rights along with their offer to buy, and it creates a 3-day cooling off period between that offer and the acceptance. All of these things would be critical with the usually vulnerable, either very low income or elderly homeowners that I see with these issues. The high-pressure sales tactics are to make you move now before this critical emergency gets worse. That cooling off period would be critical. One place that I do believe the city of Philadelphia has missed an opportunity is in not allowing a private right of action. The only people who can take action under the ordinance they have in Philadelphia would be the city attorney's office. We here have a very hardworking city attorney's office, but they aren't able to do everything. Giving homeowners and their advocates the ability to enforce this law creates an army of people who can make this happen, and I think that's an opportunity they've missed. At a last point, in meetings like this, people often focus on out-of-town or out-of-state investors, and those are the end purchasers of these homes. But the predators that I have seen abuse homeowners are unfortunately our neighbors. So I urge that any solutions that come forth have to be crafted with knowledge that the threats don't come from outside. And when I have tracked down the companies that are making these wholesaler offers, very often there is a licensed real estate professional who is an owner. They are attempting to evade the duties that the realtors and other brokers in the audience have mentioned apply by doing their business another way. That is something that needs to be accounted for in the law. The threat is not only from outside, but also from people close to us. Thank you.
No, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, my question wasn't for this specific, but to the city attorney. So I made that comment at the beginning of the hearing about us moving quickly, and then I started holding back questions and comments I had. City attorney, did you have any response to what we just heard in terms of how it would be best for, as we look through? I know one of the things that as we're parsing through what we're learning from Philadelphia, we're looking at what makes sense versus what we can already do in the city of Columbus.
That's correct, Council President Harden. Thank you for seeking our comment on this. Definitely, the City Attorney's Office is working with Council to see whether or not some of the provisions that exist in Philadelphia are able to be done here in the city. Obviously, as you're fully aware, the state constitution in Ohio is different from the one in Pennsylvania, and there are some concerns related to an Ohio Supreme Court decision that talk about the inability of local government to create a private right of action. So that is one of the issues that we've been discussing with Council. We are also here, and that's why I'm here today, to hear additional testimony about whether or not a number of these wholesalers are actually engaging in activities that are licensed by the real estate board, but they're not getting licenses. And so it may well be that we have a fix available to us that's simply not being enforced. And so we're looking into that as well.
Did you have something?
On that issue, we frequently see people who are engaging in activities that would require a license, both in the sales and in the rental and operation of rental properties, where people are not licensed. We often see that and think that it is definitely a gap in enforcement.
Thank you. And I never miss an opportunity to tell Legal Aid, thank you for all the work that you do to help support our residents every single day. We could not do this work without you guys.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Madam Chair, can I add one more point of
Please.
privilege? Thank you so much. Thank you. I was just, a couple of speakers ago spoke about a real thing that we know is happening out there where folks use potential code enforcement issues to threaten or scare our residents. And I just wanted, we have Deputy Director Celebrezzi here. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. Do you hear and sense that out there? And what are, and I see Ms. Heather Truesdale also out there with their code enforcement officers, how do we talk about opportunities, resources to push back on that?
Definitely. Thank you, President Harden, and thank you, Councilmember Favor, for holding this hearing. I've got Heather Truesdale here, who's the Administrator of Code Enforcement, which is part of Building and Zoning Services. We do recognize that there are people out there that do occasionally use 311 services to make complaints whether it's to try to make their neighborhood look nicer, or it's in this case where they're trying to make somebody feel like they're going to lose their house because they have gutters that aren't taken care of. They have a housing situation. Our code officers are trained to work with the homeowner. Our whole mantra is not about penalty, it is seeking compliance. We want them to get their yard mowed, the building fixed up to meet minimum standards so there's not a drag on the rest of the neighborhoods. Now, many times, some of the homeowners don't have the resources necessary to do these repairs. And we have a number of different programs that we work with, both the court, and we have a whole list of programs with other nonprofits that help people comply. And we put them in contact with that, and then we give them time. You know, a violation may say that they've got a week to fix it, but if they're talking to us, communicating with us, reaching out to these resources, we will extend that time to give them time to make the repairs, because ultimately we want them to stay in their house. And it is very far and few between when we actually try to vacate somebody out of their house. Usually that is a life safety issue, whether the building itself is structurally unsound, or it might be a hoarding situation where their life could be in jeopardy. But throughout that entire process, we work with them to get them the help they need, connect them with mental services issues, connect them with folks that will help clean the house or help get the house back up to standards. So we really try to take a partnership approach with these owners.
Thank you so much. And I mean, to underscore, we don't use code enforcement to go after folks. We want to make sure that folks have safety. And so if you are ever encountered, make sure that you reach back out to us. Make sure you lean on those nonprofits that a lot of times the city council funds and supports to work with homeowners, specifically seniors, low-income homeowners, so that they can stay in their home, so they can make improvements to keep your house safe, but that you can stay in your home. So we don't ever want that to be an excuse or a fear tactic to push folks into taking one of these terrible deals from the wholesalers.
Exactly.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And you know, fair point there to Mr. Celebrezzi's point, and to the gentleman who just provided testimony around reducing vulnerabilities. This is why we passed one of our housing measures back in June, which provided additional funds to the city attorney's office through the Owner Occupied Initiative program to support seniors who may find themselves in environmental court. I know the Department of Development has a critical home repair program that will help individual homeowners in Columbus who have critical repairs that need to be made so they don't lose their home. But we have always known that code enforcement has been used as a tool to weaponize against folks in the community, hence Flag Wars, an old documentary coined by the old city attorney. But nevertheless, it's incredibly important for us as a city to continue to address the crisis here, which is reducing those vulnerabilities. So thank you to our attorney from the Legal Aid Department that helped to reinforce that. Mr. Joshua Hively? Followed by Elena Biffle.
Thank you, Council President Harden and Chair Favor for hosting. My name is Joshua Hively. I am on the Clintonville Area Commission representing District 8, which is the second most northern district. A little bit of background. From 2020 to late 2022, I owned a wholesale real estate company. I guess I am the first wholesale speaker here. I do not currently operate as a wholesaler, though, and so I thought, given my experience, I would come and share. So I don't still actively participate on the front end of real estate transactions, but I do own a rental portfolio and do still sometimes act as an assignee from wholesalers. Over the last 3 years, I've actively participated in about 100 real estate transactions, both from wholesalers and on-market, all various sorts of transactions. I'm glad we're having a conversation about whether the practice of wholesaling has a role in the community or not. I did have some concerns, though, about how I felt like the meeting was positioned as wholesaling is just generally a bad practice, sort of ahead of having the conversation about it. And so I just wanted to kind of address a couple things that were in the email that I had received about the meeting. First of all, I certainly agree that any sort of misrepresentation about individuals' professional status or organizational affiliations is never acceptable. And I think curbing any sort of predatory practice is extremely important. And I'm happy to share my experience to aid in that. But I do think not all wholesaling is predatory. To the comments made by a lot of the realtors, while I know it's not maybe the most common practice, in my time as a wholesaler, often I would encourage folks to communicate with realtors first. In my opinion, in most markets, the way to get the most amount of money for your house is to list it with a realtor. But there are instances where that may not be a great fit. And so I would encourage folks to go that route first, then have a conversation about wholesaling. Reducing the inventory of affordable housing. We have a property that we recently purchased that had been vacant for 20 years. While I do own it as a rental property, it is now 2 more rental units that are online that were previously offline for over 20 years. There was another comment about fostering neglected properties. The investment strategy that we use requires us to do major capital improvements. We're buying houses that sometimes are about to fall over, and we're renovating them to full retail condition. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Go ahead. Do you have any questions? Mr. Hively, thank you for your testimony this afternoon and for being candid about your experience as being a wholesaler. I don't think the premise of this hearing or the discussion is to speak badly upon the practice itself, but it's also just to the point of recognizing where people have taken advantage of others in our community through this process and us finding a way to get a handle over it, especially given the fact that we do have a housing crisis in our community, specifically an affordable one as well. And so if there's a way that we can meet in the middle there to make sure that the rights of our residents are protected while you still have an opportunity to conduct your business in a lawful, legal way, then that sounds like a win-win to us. So I'd invite you to continue to lean into the conversation with the Council President Harden's office and myself, as you have a level of expertise that could be definitely beneficial in the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elena Beifel, followed by Anthony Panzera.
Good afternoon. Elena Biffle, representing both myself as a resident of the Near East Side and also one of those investors. So I invest in property and create rentals. I written out a lot that I wanted to say and I thought I wanted to go over today, but I'll just kind of read and talk about, like, I understand some wholesaling is predatory, but the flip side of that is I've seen wholesalers save people from having their houses foreclosed on. They can turn a transaction in 3 to 4 days when going to a realtor will take a lot longer than that. And I've been able to purchase from wholesalers. I still continually do purchase from wholesalers, as well as go through the market process of purchasing from realtors. That said, there are some wholesalers who are rogue. They are watching YouTube videos 2 hours to buy property with no money down, and they are going out and they are calling people who are in desperate needs. These are not people that we buy from. Our goal as investors in real estate in the city of Columbus is to help residents. It is not to hurt them. For example, one of our properties, we have essentially used a co-op model to help keep our rent stable in our own community. We can do that as private citizens. We do not need regulations to help people. So what I would implore is something that the state of Oklahoma did, which is kind of the model that we followed over. Some of the things that they did, they put a restriction on public marketing, so wholesalers would not be able to publicly market houses that they did not own. They basically put a prohibition on buying up properties so they could not buy them in mass bulk. There was a mandatory licensing component that they put in. Now, while I don't agree that wholesalers need a real estate license, I do believe that there is a middle ground that we can come to between kind of operating in the wild, wild west and going through the entire process of becoming a realtor. There were enhanced disclosure requirements, which I do believe would favor both the city residents and investors. And there were also penalties for violations and what they brought to the table. So in the spirit of bringing solutions and not problems, here's something that I would ask everyone to consider. Traditionally, we just really want people to follow by ethical standards. I think that's the bottom line that everyone is trying to get to. So maybe there's a way that we can strike a balance between what they're being asked to do and then what realtors are being asked to do as well. Again, I love realtors. I partner with realtors all the time, but when I need to close in 3 days, I'm calling a wholesaler. They will be able to get that done for me way faster. They will be able to help a resident a lot faster, and we've been able to do that. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. I was just leaned over to my team. I love a good hearing because a good hearing brings in folks that we have been talking to, but maybe folks we haven't heard as well as we go through policy discussion. So just make sure that we have your information before you leave so that we can reach out as we are continuing these discussions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anthony Panzera, followed by Caitlin Zupanik. I know I messed that one up. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Chair Favor and President Hardin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak regarding your pursuit of some form of legislative action or controlling action to be seen regarding the wholesaling of properties, specifically, obviously, residential properties. I speak in support of your pursuit for this measure. I've been in residential real estate 20 years, and there are some very basic fundamentals that, as an agent and as realtors that spoke before me, we are not only required to maintain, but we are expected from a professional level to maintain. And that, believe it or not, is actually how we get compensated. We are charged with the best interest of our client. With that, obviously, as you're aware, comes a fiduciary duty that must be upheld. There are no exceptions to that. If the marketing of the property and the sale is successful, we get compensation for that. If that is a higher level than what was being sought by the seller, for example, the seller gets those proceeds as well. There are many wholesale arrangements that, as spoken about, have a place and purpose in our marketplace. However, there are a lot of occasions where there is absolutely no best interest shown to the seller. There is absolutely no duty provided for either party, buyer or seller. And that is in strict contradiction to our role as being, professionals in this industry in Central Ohio. In regards to the possible solutions, one comes to mind immediately, and that is you need to be licensed. I know that might be a lot to ask, and I know that might be unpopular amongst the wholesalers that feel that they're already legitimately doing business and that they do provide some level of representation. But generally speaking, that's an option. Massive disclosure, boldface, single page. You are not being represented by someone who is acting in your best interest, period. The role of the wholesaler, if they are in a pass-through transaction, is simply to maximize their profit. It has nothing to do with whether the seller is going to receive a portion of that profit, and if there's a buyer in mind, then oftentimes that buyer may or may not be a cash buyer. It could be a market buyer, we don't know, but there's zero representation for those parties. And that, to me, is sort of fundamental to the challenges of trying to wrap your head around the issues. So in closing, I think there's an opportunity to engage at a tighter level with title companies that can actually measure these transactions and can have a legitimate part in maintaining that disclosure.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. It was very helpful. Caitlin Zepanik, followed by Kiana Jones. Hi, welcome to council.
I'm nervous. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caitlin Zupancic. I've lived in Columbus for the last 13 years, and I graduated from Ohio State in 2015, and I never left. I'm here today because I feel compelled to speak about a world a lot of people don't really understand. In 2019, I became a housing provider when my husband and I bought our first 4-unit together on an FHA loan, and we lived in that building for 4 years, and we fixed it up ourselves, paycheck to paycheck. We became great friends with our tenants and neighbors. That first property led us to buy more, and we have purchased and renovated quite a few houses over the last several years. I want to make it clear I'm not against regulation. I think having checks and balances in anything keeps things ethical, but I don't agree with wholesaling being viewed as only a bad thing. When people think about wholesaling, the first image that comes to their minds is some evil investor from California coming to steal your grandma's house. And in my experience, that's the rarest of situations. Earlier this year, I purchased a home here in Clintonville from a wholesaler. This situation was a difficult one. It was a hoarding situation. It was one of the worst houses I've ever seen. There was trash from the floors to the ceiling in every room. The owner had passed away a few months earlier, and the seller was next to kin. He did not want a traditional sale. He was embarrassed and overwhelmed. He did not want photos of the house put publicly on the MLS. He did not want hundreds of people walking through the house, and he did not have the means, emotionally or otherwise, to clear the house for sale. He lived out of state. He wanted to get rid of the house as quickly and easily as possible so he could move in. So a friend of mine who's a wholesaler told me about it, and I agreed to buy it. When I took possession of the house, the neighbors came up to me telling me stories, explaining they thought the house was in so poor condition that it'd have to be torn down. So my work began. We renovated the house top to bottom, fully permitted. We gutted the house and did all new electric and plumbing. I was able to restore a lot of the original windows and woodwork throughout the house. I did my best to keep the old character of this old Clintonville home. It took me about 6 months, and I sold it to an owner-occupant this summer. I take pride in my work, and I was proud to hand it to the next owner. When I was finished, numerous neighbors came up to me and thanked me for making the neighborhood a little brighter. At least for this particular home, everyone came out happy. The seller got what he needed, the neighborhood got what they needed, and now someone in my neighborhood, I also live in Clintonville, has a beautiful new old house. Over the years, I've encountered many other situations like this in this business. I have a lot more I wrote here, but in conclusion, since I have 19 seconds, people should be allowed to sell a house in a manner that suits them and their needs. Not everyone needs or wants a real estate agent, and every situation is different.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Once again, the invitation still stands to continue to engage with the Council President's office, who's leading this specific topic. And just to clarify, it's not a hearing to demonize wholesalers. We understand there's a role that can be played, but we want to just make sure that that role is played well and does not further destabilize an already treacherous situation.
I agree. There was a lot of speakers before me that definitely demonized wholesalers, so I just wanted to say my piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Kiana Jones, followed by Scott Hurlbert.
Good afternoon, President Hardin,
Chair Favor. My name is Kiana Jones. I am the local board president for the Columbus Realtors Association. I also sit as the chair for the Ohio Realtors Association, both of which are local chapters of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And what we've been doing for the past 75 years is fighting for fair and affordable housing, but also mainly to increase Black home ownership. Columbus is usually on the forefront for addressing these issues, and so we as an organization are particularly interested in seeing if and how other municipalities follow suit. Of course, we all know the bait and switch tactics used are unethical and predatory. But Black home ownership in particular is under attack because the majority of these homes are being purchased in low to moderate income neighborhoods or majority minority neighborhoods. Wholesalers are an important part of the real estate ecosystem, as stated earlier, when done properly. But with the aging inventory in Columbus, many of the homes are in a condition not acceptable for traditional financing and may ultimately be rehabbed to provide an opportunity for home ownership. The issue that we encounter is that most down payment assistance programs that are used to assist for affordable housing require a move-in ready home, which is a barrier to home ownership that need assistance. Perhaps if more support were provided to assist with repairs for existing homeowners, that will not cause them to delay maintenance. We understand critical repairs, but there are also simple maintenance things that can be done to allow them to understand the value of their home and not lower the value of the home and allow these investors to come in and take advantage of them. In addition, institutionalized investors whose only intent is to be landlords and own large conglomerates that prevent home ownership opportunities and greatly reduce the disposable income to our renters due to unlimited rents. But in my experience, educating the consumer is key, as the consumer determines the market. If I knew then what I know now were a person, many people would not, if they had the education, they would not work with the wholesalers. They would work with the realtor or realtist. But I want to thank you for your time. I welcome any questions.
Thank you for your continued advocacy and the work that the Realtors Organization does all throughout this country.
Thank you.
Scott Hurlbert, followed by Quay Barnes. And then our last speaker will be Joanne Greer.
Council President Hardin, Chair Favor, good to see you both again. Scott Hurlbert, part of Leawood Gardens Neighborhood Association and Mideast Area Commission, been so for more than 20 years. So my heart is in this discussion, and thank you for the opportunity to address it. I'm not going to cite the percentages of rental properties that have gone up exponentially in our neighborhoods because we're all aware of that going crazy since the Great Recession of 2008. But with this increase, we've seen a corresponding decrease in neighborhood pride and pride in home ownership, partly because no matter how well we keep up our own properties, what good does that do when we're surrounded by rental properties that aren't maintained? What good is it going to do? A lot of us are discouraged, and I've seen a lot of people move. I've seen a lot of people give up on even trying to call 311. It's frustrating. And we're talking about basic maintenance issues: mowing lawns, trimming bushes, picking up litter, not parking your vehicle on the front lawn, leaving bulk trash items at the curb for weeks and months at a time. A good 80%, I'm going to say 80% of our problems in our neighborhoods stem from rental properties. And I've been doing this for 20 years. And this is nothing against tenants. This is nothing against rentals themselves. This goes on the landlord themselves. The landlord's responsible for keeping their place up, for educating their tenants about how to maintain their home, how to keep their home. Just don't park your car on the front lawn. That's simple. No effort, no cost. has to do with code violations, refuse violations, domestic disturbances, drug houses, drive-by shootings. Just a few months ago, a Vinebrook rental home was a target of a drive-by shooting on a quiet Sunday afternoon. 30 feet from my back door, there were more than 20 rounds of semi-automatic gunfire go off. It's not pleasant. And at one housing meeting last year we had with a council member, these issues were brought up and it was suggested that you can call 311. And that was a well-intentioned suggestion, but frankly, we're tired of calling 311. This is the responsibility of the landlord, the property owner, the property manager. And I with the last few seconds, I would rather not be standing here. I would rather not be giving this testimony. I would rather the landlord take care of their properties on their own without being coerced into doing so. And I have a whole lot more to say, but that's where I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Quay Barnes, welcome back to council.
President Harden and Council Member Favor. I'm here to represent the Mideast Area Commission for about another month, and I won't be chair anymore. So I'm going to take this issue on, though. And I would like to please take consideration, though. We sent an email from our Housing Chair Commissioner, Shirley Marshall. She speaks of only one of our neighborhoods, East Hampton, but it applies to all of them. My neighborhood of Berwyn East is now 36% rental. When I moved in over 40 years ago, it was only 10%. The MAC in total is now around 45% rentals. So our concerns are this: how can people obtain the opportunity to own a home and create wealth if there are no homes to buy? How can neighborhoods instill pride and stability when those who live within them have no financial stake? How can a neighborhood maintain economic stability when businesses see it in constant transition? Plus, we all know that when community pride decreases in a neighborhood, beautification suffers and the likelihood of crime increases. It is very frustrating. Like Commissioner Marshall states in her letter, we need stronger landlord laws. In terms of the MAC, we stated some 5 years ago that this trend was heading toward our direction, coming down East Main Street and down East Livingston Avenue. We asked for social services support, of which we have none, landlord ownership requirements. We asked for increased code enforcement, and thank you, Mr. Celebrezzi, we did get some, and additional police presence. We didn't get most of what we wanted, and that's why we are where we are now. We have been told, and yes, I am sure, that the city cannot control purchases of housing and where. But what we see looks again like redlining in a different form. As in my neighborhood in the majority of the MAC, as demographics have changed, so did the percentage of rentals. We don't see these trends in Hilliard, New Albany, Upper Arlington. Why don't we? What procedures are they using? I'll be anxious to hear any solutions that you have. Wholesale landlords have to be controlled. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon, Ms. Barnes. And last but certainly not least is Joanne Greer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Council Lady Shayla and President Harden. I just want to state that I'm here about my housing, but I want to make a statement referring to what you all was saying earlier. Okay. I've been looking for housing for 2 years with my voucher, and I have faced discrimination at every turn. If landlords are not being held accountable for housing discrimination already, how can we trust the landlords? Receiving tax incentives will actually make the units accessible to people with vouchers. That's a question I have, and I'm gonna go to the next thing. Okay, it says why affordable housing when you can't house those who are already here? Like I said, I've been having my voucher for 2 years now, and it's due to the landlords who say they'll take a voucher, then changes their mind when I do a walkthrough. Also, I've been lied to by landlords about rent prices. Upon signing a lease at a property, I was told the rent I thought I was to pay, it wasn't. It was higher than the original rent amount. I'm tired of being lied to by landlords who take voucher and then renege on the rent amount, and application fees are extremely outrageous. I understand there is a law in place to stop these landlords from taking advantage of voucher holders as myself. Excuse me. However, it's not happening. Please look further into the landlords who accept these vouchers. Something has to be done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Greer, for your testimony this afternoon. And this is just a reminder that in 2021, we did pass source of income discrimination so that it is illegal in the city of Columbus to refuse to rent to someone based upon where they lawfully receive their income and how they pay their rent. If you do believe that you have been discriminated against, I would humbly ask that you reach out to legal aid. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Mr. Bryson, if you have a card that you can, he can pass on to you so that you can connect with someone from legal aid as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I did reach out to legal aid at that time, and they said there's nothing they could do about it.
Okay, we will connect with you offline, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will now transition to the Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Policy. I will pass it on to Council President Harden to share some introductory remarks.
Sorry, Councilmember, I was still wrapped up in the last conversation. What I do want to wrap up that conversation is saying that our office said that we would start this conversation. We started it earlier this year, and that we want folks to know that we're going to take action. We'll be working in the first quarter of this year to get something passed. But again, this conversation of hearing from everybody, all the stakeholders involved, both pro, and really, I didn't hear anybody against action or engaging. Just making sure that we are not demonizing folks along the way. And part of that, I just want to say, because Councilmember Favor and I do a lot of work to make sure that we specifically aren't demonizing renters as we go through this housing change in Columbus. The truth is that when we are going to add 1 million people over the next 25 years, a lot of those folks are going to be renters, especially as the housing costs increase the way that they are. We said apartments are the new first homes that a lot of people will buy or have. That's the starter home, is the new starter home, because of the cost. And so we want to make sure that we are focusing our ire on bad landlords who keep our residents in bad situations, and not folks who may just need to be renters as we have this conversation. And so we just appreciate everybody's engagement on this, and we look forward to moving something forward. But I do want to thank Councilmember Favor for her leadership writ large on housing, and that means as we think about the growth, what that means in terms of having more supply in Columbus. And what we believe is that we need more housing production. We're down in the number of housing starts under last year as a community, at a time where we need to be doubling new housing. We must use every tool in our toolbox to expand more housing. And second, we need to make it more affordable in our community and more equitable. So we know Columbus is one of the most economically segregated big cities in the country. Our current CRA policy, which most incentivizes the production of new affordable housing only in certain historically disadvantaged neighborhoods, does not help. And so we look forward to this conversation today. And I appreciate Chair Favor for adding another hearing so that we can continue to hear from folks as this legislation comes before us.
Thank you, Council President. I would now like to welcome Assistant Director Aaron Prosser with the Department of Development to present on the Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Policy Proposal.
Council President Harden, Chair Favor, appreciate the opportunity to come back before you today, really continuing the conversation that was started a couple of weeks ago when Director Stevens was able to come and present the policy. I know he did a really thorough job of laying it out, but just to make sure that everyone has the information, I want to give a quick outline and then discuss kind of how we got through this process to come to this conclusion. Following, in 2022, we did update the affordability requirements of the residential tax abatement policy and looked at what the opportunities were per the every 3-year review of that policy. But as we looked, following that update, what we realized is we really hadn't looked at the administration of the policy in the past 2 updates. And we wanted to make sure we were administering that and meeting the goals that we have in the city. I'm not sure I'm getting. Am I not on? Thank you. Thank you. So just to review very quickly the updates that we made in 2022, there were 3 really critical updates to the policy. Affordability is now required in all 3 market conditions for the residential tax abatement. The affordability increased, requiring a project to either include more or deeper affordability for that residential incentive. Market ready and ready for revitalization now require 10% of the units at 60% AMI, 10% at 80% AMI, or a wider availability of affordability, including 30% of the units at 80% AMI. And then in our ready for opportunity areas, we require 10% of the units at 80% AMI and 10% at 100%. Finally, we added affordability requirements for owner-occupied units in both market-ready and ready for revitalization. Owner-occupied units are now required buyers to be income qualified at or below 120% of area median income. As we look at the policy since 2018, when affordability requirements were added to the policy, these are some of the outcomes that we see between then and now. A little bit over 7,000 units, that represents about 25% of the total units that are produced in that same time period. It's often this policy is characterized as a developer handout. And I want to look at that 25% number, and I really want to understand that 75% of the units built in that same time period did not utilize this abatement. And what that shows is it's a critical tool to getting certain projects across the finish line that would otherwise not be feasible. These new homes would then not get built in our community. The projects that use the tool are more complex, more dense, more innovative, more diverse, and most importantly, more affordable. The required affordability for the policy is 20%, those requirements I mentioned earlier, and the outcomes of the policy in the last 5 years that we've delivered about 27% of the units with income restrictions and protections on those affordable units. And then finally, the total number of parcels that are currently receiving an abatement within those abatement areas is a total of 3.1%. As we looked at the administration, those were the updates that were made in 2022, but we wanted to look at how we were administering the policy. How were we applying it across the city? We wanted to understand, is it equitable? Is it effective at meeting our current housing challenges? And is it aligned with the other city policies and priorities? An internal working group met this year and found the following. The increase in cost to construct new housing makes the tax incentive a critical tool to make housing projects financially feasible, and its application is not expansive enough to meet that need. The application of the policy is inequitable because it focuses the development of both housing supply and affordability only in historically disinvested neighborhoods. And finally, the current CRA boundaries do not respond to how the city is changing, and the areas do not align with other city priorities and investments. Council President Harden, you mentioned we are going to be under building again this year, and not just at meeting our goal of doubling the number of units, but we will not build as many units this year in 2023 as we did in 2022. We know that in order to make up, not just for the folks that are continuing to come to our community, but for the underbuilding we've done in the last decade, we need to double the number of units. We need to add a housing unit for every job we create in order to keep pace and make sure there is enough housing for our current residents as well as the folks coming into our community. This last year, we only built about 2/3 of a house for every job. That is not sufficient to meet the need that is coming into our community. And so we wanted to understand, as we look across some of the efforts that the city's undergoing, including the zone-in update and some of the efforts and improvements that our building and zoning department has made, we know that regulatory barriers has been a focus for us, and we are working really hard to address those. But the aspect of it that really seems to be impacting our production right now is the cost barrier. So we wanted to look at that. What does that look like in Franklin County? How much is that impacting the ability to bring units into our community? And what is that impact of some of the changes? This is a similar diagram that I've shown in the past. This reflects a 3-story walk-up apartment building. And what we did was we asked an economic firm to take a look at what does it cost to build new construction in our community today. On the left, you see what is really the physical structure, right? You're going to have the land as well as both the construction costs as well as your soft costs, and that's going to, the outcome of that will be housing. That's really important because in order to execute that, to cover that cost of building, you need to get financed. That developer needs to acquire financing, and what we looked at was just conventional loan product. We looked at a 30-year amortization, and we looked at what is referred to as the 1.2 to 1.3 debt service coverage. Our financial institutions on a conventional loan are going to require that you can show that your revenues not only are sufficient to pay back the loan with interest, but also to cover operations and maintenance so that you can continue to operate and maintain that housing while you're still paying back that loan. And so what they determine is you need to be covering that 1.2 to 1.3 in order to qualify for the conventional loan. We did not assume any additional returns on the project other than what was required to get that conventional loan. And when you add that in with things like operating expenses, including, which are estimated around 18% of your revenues, property taxes, utilities, insurance, management of the property, where we are in Franklin County, across the county and across unit types, is you're going to need aggregate rent on your project to be $2,700 a month to cover that cost of construction, the cost of capital, and then continue to own and manage the property. And so we wanted to dive a little deeper, and we wanted to understand 3 different levers that we could pull from a policy side. We wanted to look at the impact of the property taxes. We wanted to look at the impact of land as we increase density opportunities in some of the corridors associated with Zone In. We know that we can drop that land percentage possibly to as low as 10%, which changes that economic feasibility of the project. And then finally, I can't emphasize enough how much the increase in interest rates over the last year, since May of '22, have impacted our ability to deliver new housing. That cost of capital is pushing a lot of our projects just out of feasibility entirely. On the right-hand side, the previous slide showed that we needed $2,700 in rent. As we play with some of those different levers, it's going to reduce that amount of revenue that's required to cover the cost of that construction. Other cities that have experienced the kind of growth we have waited until that rent gets to the point that it can cover those costs to see that residential construction accelerate. That is why I've kind of lightened it out, because I think that's the future that we're not looking for in Columbus, and we want to look at those other 3 levers that we can adjust and understand how we can make that impact on our new housing construction. So when we looked at those 3 aspects of where we had feasible residential construction, we ended up with a very, very red map. It is not feasible to build 3-story walk-up apartment building, which I've shown a picture of on the right, really in most places throughout Franklin County. It is the least expensive residential construction, so this is where you can build that either feasible or potentially feasible, and again, only based on what would be required to secure that conventional loan. If we include the tax incentive, what you see is a lot more opportunity for construction of new housing throughout Franklin County. If I reduce the land costs again to 10% by increasing densities and partnering some of these policies with the zone-in investments, we start to see a lot more opportunity for residential construction. And while we cannot impact the interest rate, that is not within our purview, I just wanted to show the impact of that increase in interest rate on our ability to deliver the units. If we drop that interest rate by just 1 point, where we were maybe about a year ago, the feasibility gets much, much better for Franklin County. And so as we looked at those different pieces and our ability to deliver meaningful public policy that can help us get that residential accelerated, we look to that our residential tax incentive as a way to reduce that property tax burden during that first 15 years. Again, on the improvements only, it is a 100% tax abatement on the improvements only, not on the total tax bill. The existing tax remains on the property during that entire time. It only abates the investment made in that new housing. The second thing we wanted to look at was how are we applying it across the city? And when we looked at some of the demographic information of where our current CRA boundaries were located, you can see them in the hashed areas over top of the map of where our median incomes are. When you look at where I have the pink to purple, all of those census tracts are above our area median income. The areas that do not have any of those colors are census tracts that are currently below our area median income. So our CRA boundaries are currently located in our census tracts that are all below our area median income. This is a map of all the tax credit projects that have been built between 2000 and 2020. Again, these are your 100% affordable projects. We know from our partners that they cannot do these projects without the use of the residential tax abatement. Therefore, if that is a tool that they need in order to get these projects across the finish line, we will continue to concentrate those affordable units in those locations with the existing CRAs. And then finally, if you think back to that map at the beginning where we looked at our current CRA boundaries, a lot of them are drawn a lot of years ago. They are quite large. They do not reflect the market changes that are happening in our neighborhoods and are causing us to end up with market conditions and thereby the required affordability that do not match what we understand about the market conditions in those neighborhoods. And so in eliminating those existing CRA boundaries, we could apply those affordability requirements at the census tract level, being far more responsive on the affordability requirements in our changing neighborhoods. And then finally, we know there are these significant efforts happening in our community between the zone-in effort, you can see the zone-in corridors indicated there in red, but also the investment in transit and ensuring that we have opportunities for not just housing, but affordable housing, coupled with those investments, making sure that we're maximizing those changes in our communities to access affordable housing for our families and individuals. And then finally, we looked at where we had our tools that we were deploying around job creation and economic development. And again, our CRA boundaries do not align with those and limiting the opportunity for our families to locate in affordable housing close to job opportunities. And so in looking across all of that work, and again, considering those three questions, is it doing enough to address our current housing challenge? Are we applying it equitably? And is it aligning with our current policies and priorities? We looked across the city and the recommendation is to expand the availability of the tool to the municipal boundaries of the city of Columbus. This is similar to the application in both Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Akron. They also administer their policy in the same way. We would exclude existing TIF agreement areas, the existing legacy CRA areas, and then the existing commercial CRA areas. We would align the area designations and remove those existing CRAs. We would no longer talk about Southside CRA or Franklinton CRA. We would simply talk about the Columbus Housing Community Reinvestment Area. Finally, it creates a predictable and consistent process. Again, a lot of our partners are utilizing it to bring really creative and innovative projects to the finish line and adding another layer of complexity to that process, which can add 6 or 7 months, would render that project not feasible. And then finally, we have a requirement with City Council to look at the affordability requirements every 3 years, and we are due up to do that again in 2025. So I will stop there and see if council members have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Prosser for that presentation, a reminder of what we talked about. And once again, just a reminder that 2 weeks ago, we did have a hearing that is on our YouTube page where we asked a lot of questions about the policy. Council President, if you don't have any questions, I'll go right into speakers.
Can I just make one point?
Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did make this last 2 weeks ago, so I'm being a bit redundant. But Aaron, when you briefed me on this and you said it again today, we have a policy choice that we can make when it comes to how we deal with affordable housing. You talked about other communities allowing the market just to do what it does, and the way that they allow for building, or the way that building starts again, is they don't do anything. They let the market go so that the rents become so high that then they can afford to go to a bank and get a loan to pay for the project. And we can do that. The city that you talked about was Austin. That did that. Well, last year, as I meet with large city council presidents every year, we come together. Our meeting last year was on affordable housing. My seatmate was the council president of Austin, and what she talked about was not just the housing issue that created, it was the homelessness issue that created. And where we have a homeless issue here, it pales in comparison to what Austin is facing now, where she thinks that their homelessness issue is unsolvable because the market is so off bat. And now they can build now because the rents are so expensive, but it pushed so many people even outside of the market. We're trying to make a choice so that we don't get to where Austin is. And that does mean that we have to use every tool in our policy toolbox to help us build more now. This is strictly, and this is why I get so frustrated from some of our friends in the community who thinks that this is just about developers or something. This is about supply and demand. If we have all these people coming to Columbus and we're not building enough housing for them, that means that the affordability leaves our market. And so I just wanted to remind us that we have choice. We have a choice when it comes to the policies around housing and how we use these toolboxes. No one loves every tool, but we have to use them if we're going to keep some affordability here. So I just wanted to put a finer point on the piece, that statement that you made about choices and rent prices going up.
And Council President, we know that looking at nationwide data, that for every $100 that rent increase in a region, that homelessness increases 9%. There is a direct correlation. It is a housing issue, and we need to have enough housing, or we will continue to see that pressure on our most vulnerable. And that is what we are trying to utilize some of these tools. And again, this body over the course of just this year has approved $63 million to support our most vulnerable. It is about a suite of tools and making sure that we are allowing all of those to work as best they can. And this is a really important tool that's also very responsive and one that we can continue to calibrate. We continue to report to council annually, so you guys can keep an eye on how that is being utilized so that it can continue to be the most effective tool that it can be.
Thank you for that. I also point out that at the time of the creation of this PowerPoint, you had 6.5 for interest rates, and I think we're at 7, a little bit above 7 now. So that only exasperates the data that you just shared with us. We will go right into our public speakers for this afternoon. Once again, please state your name, any organization that you might represent, and you have 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Joe Motil. Welcome back to council. Followed by Ann Bishop.
Afternoon. Council President Hardin and Councilwoman Faber. Joe Motel, 167 West Cook Road. You got to love the timing of announcing this citywide tax abatement policy right after the election. Not that the tax abatements are a controversial issue with voters or anything. This is just another tool in the toolbox that is not going to help address our affordable housing crisis. This idea is just one more developer-driven tool promoted by them and their politically connected lobbyists who whine about everything, and you foolishly listen to them time and time again. They have as much control over development policies in this city as the NRA has over gun laws. This tax abatement policy only benefits the well-off and developers' bank accounts so they can maintain their excessive profit margins. And the City of Columbus's Department of Corporate Welfare naturally follows suit supporting it. This is another screwdriver and hammer in the toolbox that's going to continue to defund public education, increase evictions, foreclosures, homelessness, increase property taxes for those on fixed incomes and low to moderate income earners. And at a time when 2 levies have passed and the Franklin County Auditor's property tax reappraisals are going to financially burden homeowners and renters alike. Please tell me how your CRA tax abatement policies since 2018 have actually benefited our affordable housing crisis. They created 1,434 units between 2018 and 2022 for those of annual incomes of roughly $52,000 to $63,000 a year and a developer buyout of 134 units. I don't call that progress. We have gone from 54,000 people paying 50% or more of their incomes on rent now to 84,000. We are going backwards. How can you justify the owner of a $1 million home on Fair Avenue to pay only $994 in property taxes, yet the owner of a $259,000, 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom home on the west side pays $1,358? Zoning reform is aimed towards building more housing, will merely provide more housing for the moderate to high income earners for the labor pool of corporate Columbus. We all agree there is a supply and demand issue, but no one wants to give a timeline on when that supply and demand issue will be met or when things are actually going to get better. That's because it's 7 to 10 years away at least, if that. So what are we going to do in the meantime? Rental assistance is needed, but how long are we going to continue to pay out millions in taxpayer assistance while landlords and developers continue to raise rents out of greed? $80 million bond fund is earmarked to build affordable housing. It might create about 400 units. You have city officials telling people in public meetings that seniors need to move out of their homes to make room for those with families. So are you also going to decide for me where I should live or who I should sell my house to? Another city official commented that new zoning reform would cause 25% of homeowners to lose their homes. Since when do we need one house per every job created? And don't 2 job earners live together anymore? And why doesn't your taxpayer-paid housing strategy discuss the repercussions of tax abatements? And I personally get tired of reading about taxpayer-financed biased reports that are formulated to support the city's positions. I have much more to say, and I will send you the rest of my testimony, but I also want to say that, just in correction, President Hardin, the 1 million increase in population is for the region, not for the city of Columbus. And I hear this all the time being reported, and it's very confusing to the people in this room and others that they understand that population projection is not the city of Columbus, but a 15-county region. And also, homelessness and our housing issue are 2 different issues. Sure, they do come together to some degree, but we also need a homelessness policy that is truly lacking in this city. We need more transitional housing, more affordable housing. I'm not opposed to 60% AMI tax abatements, as you well know, but this CRA policy is really not putting anything more than a dent in our housing crisis. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your advocacy. Council President, any thoughts there?
Joe, Mr. Motil, I don't have any question, but just to push back on that 1 million for the region, you're 100% correct that projection is for the region, yeah. But my pushback is the city of Columbus is playing and will play an outsized role in building the housing. If you look around the region at the other communities that are supposed to be helping us build the housing that will help with that supply and demand, we are the ones who are keeping it at all. There any building. So the necessity for us to build more everywhere is imperative. Sure. It is imperative. And I do disagree also that the housing and the homelessness is not connected.
They are somewhat.
To me, they are 100% connected. But in terms of solutions and work, we need to have more 60%. Councilmember Favor advocates for 40 and 50%, but there is no way, I almost said no way in hell, there's no way that we can do that without real incentives deeper than what we are talking about in this incentive policy. So I appreciate you. I look forward to continuing to work with you. I think that we're fighting for the same people. We might just be coming at it different ways.
Okay.
Thank you. If you don't mind sending the rest of your remarks so that we both have them.
Sure.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Director Prosser, though, Mr. Motil's comments did segue to a point that I believe our next person is going to provide testimony might hit. But when we think about what this policy has done to create developments that are purely all affordable. We're talking 60% and below. We're talking about permanent supportive housing that supports our very low income folks or folks who are returning back into our community. These projects would not be able to make the numbers work had it not also been for the coupling of not only this tax incentive policy, but also the bond package that had been passed in 2020, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it's very much about coupling all of those funding sources together to get to that real deep affordability and make sure that it's income restricted and protected for those individuals and families over time. And this has increasingly become a critical part of getting those projects across the finish line because our partners that develop affordable housing are subject to all the same cost increases. They also have financing into their projects that are impacted by the interest rates, as well as increase in labor and materials, and also our land costs are increasing across the board. And so as their projects get more challenging to deliver, how we deploy these tools will amount to whether or not those projects get built. And the ability for us to expand those opportunities to our partners across the city so that we can have affordability throughout the city, this tool becomes the linchpin between whether or not they decide to build it in other parts of the city or just within our existing CRA boundaries.
Thank you for that. Ms. Bischoff is next, followed by Jeff Mormon. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Joanne Greer. Thank you. Welcome back to council.
Chair Favor, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the expansion of the residential tax incentive within the Columbus Community Reinvestment Area policy. My name is Ann Bischoff with Star House. First, I'd like to thank you for your longstanding support of Star House as we partner with teens and young adults who are exiting homelessness. In Franklin County, there's a baseline of 3,000 individual young people ages 14 to 24 who experience homelessness in a year's time. And we believe there could be thousands more, especially as our community grows. The common denominator of their experience is disconnection from family. Half were in foster care at some point. Others ran away from abuse in the home. Some were kicked out of their parents' home for being pregnant or identifying as LGBTQIA+. Lack of affordable housing is also a major factor in their experience. The proposed policy to expand incentives for citywide affordable housing development while considering the required level of rent affordability based on census tracts is a positive step toward ensuring that all residents throughout the city of Columbus have equal opportunities to secure affordable housing. In this context, I would like to draw your attention to the work being done by Star House to prevent chronic homelessness into adulthood. Star House provides youth experiencing homelessness with immediate access to safety and on-site resources at our 24/7 drop-in center located in the Milo Grogan neighborhood. In 2023, Star House's drop-in center has served more than 1,400 individual young people experiencing homelessness, up from 819 just 2 years ago. It is worth noting that only 11% of the young people served at our drop-in center come from the zip code in which the drop-in center is located. Drop-in center guests are coming from every corner of our city. In fact, while there is certainly a concentration of youth coming from the Columbus City Schools District, youth are also coming from the zip codes of all 16 Franklin County school districts. These statistics highlight the importance of equitable distribution of affordable housing for young people from all areas of our city. What's more, with our partners Finance Fund and Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, we offer 62 apartments with on-site access to jobs, education, healthcare, therapy, case management, and more at Carol Stewart Village in Franklinton. Multi-partner projects like Carol Stewart Village play a vital role in addressing the housing crisis. The tax exemption for this project helps keep rents low enough to meet our residents' needs. I wholeheartedly support the expansion of the residential tax incentive by incentivizing affordable housing development. We can mitigate the risk of rent increases and maintain the high standard of living that makes Columbus such a desirable place to live. Expanding the abatement would make creative housing solutions like Carol Stewart Village and so many others more feasible with a wider range of partners throughout our city. In conclusion, thank you for your support of Star House and for prioritizing affordable housing initiatives. By working together, we can boost affordable housing development. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this evening, and especially for the work that you do to support our young folks in our community every single day. My question is really directed to Director Prosser, but it's also to Mr. Motil's point and the point that was made by Ms. Bischoff as well. If we think about the time frame of really 2019 to where we are now, you layer on the pandemic and what that did to our housing market, as well as some changes, if we could say, if that's the right word to use, around the 9% low-income housing tax credit, and the reality that Columbus being the only growing city in the state of Ohio, and quite frankly in the Midwest, that we have not been successful in obtaining approved projects in the competitive range that would have absolutely made a bigger dent in the creation of more affordability or more projects like Ms. Bishop's being able to come online. And so can you talk about a little bit of the advocacy that you all have been doing, and perhaps some that has been going on at the state level to right that ship? Because you're absolutely right. I want to see more numbers as well. But one understanding that a part of the capital stack, one part of that is just the tax incentive. The other piece has to be other tools like the low-income housing tax credit, which no projects that are deemed affordable are getting built in this country without that level of support. So I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yes, and as our partners that deliver units that are affordable at those deeper levels and really addressing some of the specific needs of populations within our community, the ability to secure those tax credits, there's two different kinds. One's more valuable, one's a little less valuable, and non-competitive. And so when the non-competitive tax credits are utilized, we have to, as a city of Columbus, engage in that conversation and put funds into that project in order to get it through. And as we've seen a lower number of what we call 9% projects, which are much more valuable but are the competitive, as we've seen less of those awards in Central Ohio, we've seen a need for us to support more and more of those 4% projects, not only using our bond funds, but also coupling the tax abatement. I think the other thing, as OFA, Ohio Housing Finance Agency, has looked at where they prioritize their investment on the tax credits, they link that with those opportunity neighborhoods. And so as we look at our ability to use the tax incentive to even support those 9% projects, we want to make sure that our partners have the availability in those other portions of the city of Columbus. So it allows us to align our other tools more broadly with the priorities at Ohio Housing Finance Agency. Again, doubling down on the opportunity to get those 9% projects across the finish line, bringing our tools into the project to make sure that we're maximizing those and not limiting this tool to a specific geography that doesn't align with where the Ohio Housing Finance Agency is prioritizing. Just again, furthers another year where we won't have that affordable housing get built in our community.
That is the point that I really wanted to stress when we think about a citywide policy that can cover a wide range of locations that, quite frankly, we were just not being successful in the city of Columbus. It was not for the failure of the projects that were coming to us, and we're talking about deeply affordable projects, permanent supportive housing projects, the projects that are falling below where we are meeting right now, that 50% and below. It is just not going to get built without stacking other tools onto it. And so if we are riding the ship with our 4% and adding the bond on it, that tax incentive is absolutely necessary to make those types of projects work indefinitely. So once again, if I'm thinking about relieving the pressure, if we only focus on one sector of housing, that's going to put pressure on another level of it. So that's why my advocacy is definitely for our deeply affordable, but also understanding that the pressure has to be relieved across the board to spread some of that, spread some of this out over the different levels of income. So I hope that is making sense as I'm saying it. Thank you, Ms. Bischoff, for your testimony this afternoon. Next, we have Joanne Greer. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Roy Lowenstein. Lostein, followed by Letha Pugh. And just for the record, Ms. Greer stated that she had already provided testimony and that we could move forward. Welcome to council.
Good afternoon, Chair Faver. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm an affordable housing consultant. I also happen to be zoning chair of the Near East Area Commission. NEAC does not have an official position on the tax abatement issue, so I'm not really here for that, but it is another role. I have a somewhat more nuanced position on tax abatements than some folks do. There's no question that all affordable housing projects really need 100% 15-year tax abatement. There's also no question that our most distressed neighborhoods are not going to see housing development done without it as well. So the question is really about expanding the CRA districts to parts of the city that are somewhat more affluent. My opinion is, as someone who's worked on thousands of spreadsheets for housing projects over the last 40 years, is that I wonder if there really is an opportunity to extract more public benefit from this tool than we have been getting. And I know that the city has added some requirements as time has gone by to try to do so, but I don't know that it's gone far enough. We spend a lot of time talking about affordable housing as a goal, and it's worth noting, though, that the 80% rents that we incentivize developers to provide, that's really virtually a market rent in large parts of Columbus. And so it's really not getting at affordability all that well. 60% rents are closer to what we're shooting for, but even now, a 60% rent with incomes having gone up so much in the metropolitan area, a 60% rent is borderline affordable. I think we need to look at what other factors are limiting housing production in our city. The availability of affordable land, our zoning code, which I know are working on modifying over time, permitting, labor force limitations. There are a lot of factors. There's no silver bullet here, and I know that no one thinks there is, but I think that we might end up being surprised by what comes out of this, that this on its own is not going to deliver what we need. 120% of income on for sale products, that's still a pretty expensive house, and it can still be sold to the middle class and even upper middle class. So I just think that producing more housing is not on its own going to produce more affordability, and I think a more nuanced approach is needed. I'd be happy to propose another way of calculating it that might yield more public benefit than we're currently going to get. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Ms. Director Prosser, if you could just speak to, there was a point that was made that 80% of the area median income is pretty much market rate rent, and I would probably respectfully disagree with that statement, knowing what rent is looking like in our community.
And I think it's really important to remember, I don't think there's a bigger proponent for us making sure that we're getting the full value out of the public policy than you have been. In our conversations last year, you really pushed us to make sure that we were getting as deep an affordability out of this tool as we could. But it is also a tool that unlocks that supply. And so calibrating it properly is really the trickiest thing that we have to do, and I think that's reflected in the fact that council asks us to look again every 3 years to ensure that the maximum value is coming out of it. But if it doesn't get used because it's not valuable enough to get a project across the finish line, it's not going to do any of those other public policy priorities. And when we look at where those market rents are, I think two things are really important. One, we can see the market rents and markets, units that are available at those rents are continuing to slip away. And as we have those price changes, it is really important to remember that these units are not just less expensive, but they are income restricted and they are protected. And they are protected through that compliance annually. So as we think about year one of that project, and then all the way through to year 15, that unit is available at that price point and with a family or an individual at that income level in that unit. They are not just less expensive, but income restricted and protected. And that's a really important part of stability for those families, making sure that they have an understanding of where those rents will be over time and allowing them to be in communities that they couldn't otherwise afford. So while there may be 60 or 80% rents available in some places in our city, we know that as we continue to have escalating housing prices, the most acute examples of those will be around our highest opportunities, right? The housing that's around our jobs, the housing that ends up close to our new investment in transit, those will all be the highest rents. And what this policy does is include those units in those market rate projects so that our folks, if you're a nurse working at Wexner Medical Center, you have the opportunity to live in a place where you could walk to work. The market is not going to provide that around the Ohio State University, but this tool allows that unit to exist and be income restricted and protected for that employee or that family across time in those high opportunity neighborhoods.
Thank you for that. And then the other point that I wanted to make sure we were clear on is that we didn't haphazardly pinpoint 120% of the area median income just as a City of Columbus thing. This was really us being in alignment with HUD's policies, correct?
Correct. And it was really important that this tool remain available for those delivering affordable home ownership, because that continues to be a priority of the Columbus housing strategy. And so when we looked across at our partners, both through the state with federal funds and then also our partners at the Community Land Trust, they are looking at those buyers below 120% AMI. So we wanted to align with those programs to make sure that the tool was available as those affordable home ownership opportunities were built in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Losting, I would also just encourage you to please share your comments and feedback, suggestions that you have with us, because we would love to further elaborate on some of the ideals you expressed. Ms. Pugh, followed by Carla Sutton.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Favors. My name is Letha Pugh. I am a small business owner here in town. Building affordable housing has been a calling for me, and as I continue to learn and grow in this space, the number one lesson is that the numbers supersede the heart's need to help those in the community needing support. While I have the luxury of being a successful small business owner, I am also working shoulder to shoulder with those I employ to find housing that they can afford in neighborhoods that are welcoming, in schools that will hopefully give their children an opportunity to succeed. Affordable housing encompasses a complex mix of managing numbers, access to those in the industry that have a gift for construction, and working with organizations in the community who also share the mission of increasing the number of units at an affordable rate. And when I say affordable, that's for everyone, because all housing has to be affordable based on your income. I tend to work with folks in the 60% affordability rate. In terms of housing development, the citywide CRA could stimulate investment in affordable housing and community development projects across the city and in all neighborhoods. This legislation could foster increased relationships between local banks and local developers or community organizations that finance residential and multifamily projects. They may even be spurred to provide mortgages to low and moderate income home buyers. In this way, this legislation can help to increase housing availability and home ownership in communities that might otherwise be overlooked by traditional lenders. There has to be space in a discussion on increasing the housing stock that involves not just a few zip codes, but the whole city. We all have a responsibility to care for our neighbors, whether that's through an opportunity to send their child to a better school or enjoy the benefits of a tax base that supports robust economic development. To do this, I, as a new developer, need support. If I purchase a property with the intent to either preserve existing housing rates or build new housing, the numbers have to work, and the tax abatement is one of the tools I use to get the numbers in alignment with the mission. A lot left sitting idle for years and the taxes are being paid does not help with the housing crisis. A community should welcome the chance to provide opportunities for housing. And again, not just in certain parts of the city, but all over the city. In conclusion, tax incentives can be a powerful tool for promoting housing development, addressing shortages, achieving other social, economic, and environmental goals. The Columbus Housing Community and Reinvestment Policy is needed. Let's all do what we can to increase housing in this city, employing all the tools we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pugh, for your advocacy and now your expertise to be a part of the solution. Thank you. Next, we have Carla Sutton, followed by Carla Carr, followed by Carly Booz. Who put this together?
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Sutton. I'm here representing myself. I'm here to speak on the importance of keeping our extremely low income and unsheltered neighbors in the conversation today. I'm a retired Air Force nurse, and I am currently finishing my Master of Social Work program at Ohio State. After years of working in impoverished communities as a volunteer animal rescuer, I created a novel harm reduction program called Pet Wellness Outreach, which I now administer out of Southeast Healthcare. I engage with unsheltered Columbus residents and their pets to help with vet care, pet food, and other needs. Additionally, this engagement builds trust and provides a path to services for unsheltered folks in Columbus. Pet Wellness Outreach is a creative and pragmatic approach that provides just one answer to resolving the complicated crisis of homelessness in our city. As we all know, there is a shortage of low-income housing in Columbus. There is a substantial shortage of property owners and housing units willing to support permanent supportive housing options for our most severely ill residents. To be clear, most of the thousands of unsheltered residents in Columbus qualify for permanent supportive housing, which provides wraparound services and extra support to keep them successfully housed. To that end, it is wholly justified that outreach workers like me are disheartened and frustrated to see our city willing to give tax abatements at the pace and scale being provided to developers, while our clients and their pets sit on waiting lists for housing that is simply not there. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, for every 100 extremely low-income households, there are only 37 affordable homes available. In total, there is a shortage of 7.1 million rental homes available for households making 50% of the area median income. Here in Columbus, from the years 2017 to 2021, tax increases led to the loss of 38,000 rental units with leases of $900 or less per month, displacing countless families. Regarding the deleterious effects of tax abatements on communities, they raise taxes on existing homes in the vicinity of new builds. Since these new builds are typically in underserved neighborhoods, it is the low-income and fixed-income residents who are impacted the most. They are eventually priced out of their home and neighborhood. Consequently, this leads to more displacement and more homelessness, and the cycle continues on. So to the council, or perhaps the Department of Development, considering your plan to continue with the CRAs with tax abatements, are there specific numbers of plans to add permanent supportive housing, additional on top of what we might have? And that is it. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Director Prosser, I would absolutely love for you to step in there. But to a point that I made earlier, there's some more advocacy that has to be done when we talk about the projects that, the lack of projects that Columbus has been received approval on, specifically at the competitive level. And when we talk about the need for more permanent supportive housing in our community, it's not going to get done without those projects, without that support. And so I know the department has been very loud about the needs of Columbus and the fact that we are the only growing city in this state that is not receiving that type of tax credit support that we need. It's also why we continue to be extremely grateful to voters who voted on the bond project, because without the 4% tax credit and the bond dollars coupled with the tax incentive policy, we would get no permanent supportive housing. We would get no housing that was below 50% of the area median income. But Director Prosser.
And I think that's been a priority, working with our partners that deliver permanent supportive housing. There were a couple of projects that were funded under the $50 million 2019 housing bond. And when we looked at how we were going to allocate the $200 million housing bond, it was a big priority was dedicating funds specifically to permanent supportive housing. So in that bond package, $30 million is dedicated to that permanent supportive housing. But it will need to be coupled with funds from our friends at Ohio Housing Finance Agency, with our residential tax incentive. We have to layer all these pieces on in order to get that project through. And it is one that is one of the more complicated to deliver. So we're working with our partners that deliver PSH to say, what else could we do to help facilitate, to help get those projects where they need to be. And I think that has been an ongoing conversation and things that we'll continue to talk about. How do we as the City of Columbus help uplift those projects so that we can have those units for our individuals and families in the community?
Is there a forecasted number for permanent, like any additional, is there some kind of number that we can expect as far as units that might be out there soon?
And I think as we continue to underproduce housing, that problem gets exacerbated. So it's a continually moving target. That one of the reasons for this policy is to help us stave that escalation of folks that need that type of unit. And so as we think about all of these policies in conjunction, we want to make sure that we are monitoring the whole system so that it can functionally do what it needs to do to house most of our families. And then what we can do with our public dollars is push them to the most vulnerable, make sure they are making the most impact because the rest of the system is functioning properly. If we continue to underbuild, that pressure just gets harder and harder. And what we know is when we have that housing scarcity, anything that is a challenge for you securing housing, you have a felony on your record, you have an eviction, you have children, a lot of different factors suddenly look less and less attractive to the folks that are renting out units, and suddenly it becomes harder and harder, and that exploitation gets more likely. And so that pressure on the system, we have to alleviate it so that there is units available for all of our folks, and then we need to take our public dollars and invest them in our most vulnerable. If we don't, those public dollars get spread out too far, and they're not going to be as meaningful to supporting those most in need. And that's really what we're trying to do with this suite, right? The work that Council's doing on their agenda, the distribution of the $200 million housing bond, all of these layers come together to hopefully create a system where we have abundant and affordable housing again in Central Ohio. But it takes this whole suite of tools to make sure that we're not adding pressure to that already vulnerable system.
Thank you for your testimony and advocacy this afternoon. Carla Carr, followed by Carly Booz. You know, the one thing we did not acknowledge, Director Prosser, is that the reality is that no matter if it's market rate or if it's deeply affordable, it still costs the same to build. The difference being that we got to subsidize the rent to help address our most vulnerable populations. So, Ms. Carr, welcome to Council.
Hi, thank you. My name is Carla Carr. I'm with Hilltop Connections. I live in Central Hilltop, and I just want to kind of give you all a little bit of idea of what's kind of going on in our neighborhood where we already have an active CRA and have for some time. 73% of the properties on my street are non-owner occupied. We have 20 vacant properties on my street. And you could find that consistent street after street after street in Central Hilltop. And so I often hear that we're in this housing crisis, but then I see vacant properties all over the neighborhood. Ones that have sat vacant for years, some of them 5, 10 years, that just sit boarded up, untouched. And obviously that's not good for our community. And then most of the properties that are owned by landlords, those are a business. And so, you know, I think that, you know, we're giving these businesses a tax incentive to build in our neighborhood. And it's with houses that are over 100 years old, many of them. And so you have brand new houses with 100% tax abatement next to people who've lived in their family homes for generations, perhaps, who are getting their taxes increased. So the brand new homes that are getting built on our street are selling for up to $100,000 more than any street on our house has ever sold for. And these are in affordable housing programs. And none of the residents who are currently on our street could afford those homes. And so it's a hardship to the owner occupants. I know there are programs to help them with the code violations, but really the most egregious properties throughout our community are the rental properties. They have trash, they're dump sites, they're drug houses, and we've got the owners, they're not looking at that. They don't see it. They live in California, New York, France. You can't find these people. You have to hunt them down if there is a problem with their property. They don't respond to you, and probably very unlikely to come into court under code enforcement rules. So it's systemic, right? It continues with all the rental properties in the neighborhood. And I'm very familiar with the zone in, and it's going to be our neighborhood who gets the ADUs in the back. It's not going to be some of the wealthier neighborhoods in the community. They're not going to be throwing apartments in the back of their backyards. But these will all be, again, owned by landlords, not located in the community, not looking at the trash that we deal with on a regular basis. And so I just want to hopefully encourage you to kind of really focus more on home ownership in our community. I mean, even the land bank itself works in the community. They build a house and it gets sold directly to an investor, not helping homeowners.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. Council President, I don't know if you have any thoughts around that. A couple of points I would highlight would be, so one of the policies that we are attempting to advance this cycle around our housing measures is a vacant property registry. It is not against the law to have vacant property in our community as long as it adheres to the vacant property code. However, we are in a housing deficit at this point, and I cannot find another way to say this except for poop or get off the pot. And that's what it's really about, because we need to make sure that we can get these houses put back into good use so that good folks can either purchase that house or use that house as a rental for this time in their life. I would also acknowledge the fact that all vacant property more than likely doesn't even fall within the tax incentive policy that currently exists. But if there's new property that is being built, that property must be income qualified to meet our affordable housing restrictions that Director Prosser already outlined. So it is not, if there's something, and these properties get income qualified every single year. So if there's something that is sticking out to you, I would ask for you to send a communication to me or to Director Prosser so that we can take a look at some of those properties that you have identified today. Council President, I don't know if you had anything you'd offer.
No, I was just going to make fun of you for the future and seeing your name and quote of poop in the dispatch. I would also say that another one of the policies that was advocated by, I think, Councilmember Mitch Brown was around home ownership in particular and making sure that it was available as part of our housing package. So we hear all those points that you made, Ms. Carr, and we appreciate your advocacy and look forward to continue working with you.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it was Councilmember Brosta de Padilla. We did pass a significant amount of dollars earlier this year, Ms. Carr, to support home ownership, specifically around first-time home buyers in our community. Ms. Booz, followed by Scott Herbert.
Thank you again. I am still Carly Booz, Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. We support allowing the CRA tool to be used throughout the community to address affordable housing shortages. Our support is rooted in two influential facts. The first is that there is no neighborhood in our city that is immune from the effects of the housing challenge. And the second is that every single resident in our city will be positively impacted by closing that gap. Earlier this year, the Alliance completed a research project that assessed the growing housing needs in our community. It found that 52,000 Franklin County households are currently severely cost burdened. And there was a moment earlier in tonight's discussion where there was a misstatement of the facts. It is 52,000 households who are severely cost burdened. It is only when you look at the full 15-county Central Ohio region that you hit that 80,000 number. So I want to make sure that we're talking about the facts. And that's important because this 52,000 number represents a 4% reduction over 6 years. That is a notable accomplishment that most of our peer cities have not been able to achieve, especially in light of pressures and complications from the pandemic and the resulting inflation crisis. That progress is a testament to local policies like concretely linking the CRA to affordability goals, as well as activating the power of affordable housing bonds, and we are beyond proud that the City of Columbus is merging as a national leader in this conversation. However, our research did find that the pace of population growth, as you rightly noted, risks reversing that trend, and by 2040, an additional 20,000 more families could become severely cost burdened throughout that 15-county region. That would represent a population roughly the size of Newark, Ohio's 16th largest city, slipping into extreme housing instability in just one generation. This challenge is not isolated to pockets of our community. It is one that touches every single one of us. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's gap analysis, there isn't a single zip code in all of Columbus where a minimum wage worker can afford even a modest apartment. But just as that deficiency impacts us all, meaningful solutions benefit us all as well. The research I mentioned earlier found that closing our housing gap will strengthen our schools, our healthcare, and our economic viability as a community. For instance, that research found that cutting our housing gap in half, doing just half of what we need to be doing anyways, would lift 5 of our local school districts up an entire letter grade in the state of Ohio's performance assessment, an achievement that would benefit every student in those communities. To get there, we need to seize every opportunity, including removing the geographic restrictions on where CRA can be used, which artificially constrains the affordable housing toolkit in our neighborhoods. It also helps reverse housing segregation and better aligns with local policies and, as you mentioned, the state of Ohio's funding priorities. For this reason, I want to say thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. If you don't mind sending your testimony over, that would be really helpful. Thank you for your testimony and advocacy overall. Next, we have Scott Herbert, followed by Melissa Tompkins. Left. Scott Herbert. All right, let the record reflect that Scott is not present. Melissa Tompkins. All right, Melissa Tompkins. Let the record reflect that Melissa Tompkins was not present either. Council President Harden, do you have any final remarks? Well, thank you all for tonight's participation in our hearing. Thank you to Council President Harden for being here today. Thank you to Assistant Director Prosser, as well as our community members with us here today. I want to ensure all of our residents and community members who are listening online that we do not take housing in our region's crisis lightly. As I've said many times before, we cannot fix this housing crisis with one policy. We need to truly be intentional about making changes to our zoning, protecting the affordability we have, and being creative about adding more housing stock in our city. I do invite you all to continue to stay engaged with council offices with the Department of Development to share your ideas and stay updated on the initiatives that you've heard today. I'd also like to take a moment to remind everyone about housingforallcbus.com, where you can find information on the council housing initiatives and Rental 614, which serves as the rental assistance hub for tenants and landlords. Finally, I'd like to thank my staff, Sandeep D, Kendrew Tyler, and Naya Walters, as well as our team here at City Hall for helping us with our technology and streaming, as well as Mark Carter, as well as our team at CTV. Thank you, and that now concludes our housing hearing. Have a wonderful afternoon.